Hey, everyone. Happy Friday. Wow, Friday. I just felt like we were talking about AI on Monday, and then maybe it was Tuesday or Wednesday, artificial general intelligence, AGI. Today is super intelligence. Are we all dumb? I don't know, but we've got a lot to talk about here at Tech Strong Gang. We've got great people to talk about. We've got a whole Seattle crew going on today. He's always in Seattle, usually, unless he's traveling. Our friend Fred Wilmot. Joining him in Seattle, though, and he is traveling, is Ira Winkler. Staying on the West Coast, man in Silicon Valley, John Swartz. And still up, I don't know if you're in Lake Placid still, but the Dean, Mike Vizard. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Still am, and boy, it's hot and sweltering in Lake Placid. But there's no
as it is in Seattle. As it is in Seattle, we hear. Not as hot as it is in Dubai, probably. But anyway, that was the green room discussion. Let's jump into our real discussions for today. We're going to start off. AWS had a bit of a shindig this week, and they made a whole bunch of announcements, as you would imagine, around AI agents, Q, Bedrock, all the AWS buzzwords, as well as opening up registrations for reInvent in December. But Mike, what's the deal with AI agent builders? It looks like AWS wants to be king of the hill.
Yeah, oddly enough, AWS and all those folks in Seattle descended upon New York this past week and launched a thing called Amazon Bedrock Agent Core Services. And it's basically the frameworks that you need to go build and deploy AI agents at scale. And they were pointing out that all these things right now are missing for all our chit-chats about AI agents taking over the world. They're like saying, you can't really do that unless you have things for securing their identities and giving them gateways to access APIs and then the tools for building and deploying them. And admittedly, this is a preview of something that they're rolling out, so they're a little bit early. But one of the things that seems to be coming through loud and clear is that enterprises are now looking at all this stuff and starting to put the pieces together. And it's not sure, to my way of thinking, but maybe more of them are going to rely on the cloud than ever because they don't have these capabilities in an on-premise environment. At least that's what AWS is betting on. And it was interesting because they had the head of development for Intuit was there talking about how they built a whole operating system for AI agents on top of the AWS service. This will warm your heart, but the head of platform engineering enablement for Reuters was there also talking about what they're up to and their plans for building out AI agents. And it's still early days as far as the enterprise is concerned, but it looks like I'm betting that AWS, all these services will be copied by every other cloud service provider shortly. So, Alan, it looks like we're in a race for AI agent infrastructure.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of A's in that AI agent infrastructure thing. But look, this is not a new story, though. For me, the agentic AI thing first kind of burst on the scene with Benioff and Salesforce, Agentforce, and building thousands and tens of thousands of agents. And ever since that day, every vendor under the sun has said, we want to be your agent man. I want to be your backdoor agent man. And why wouldn't AWS want to be that too? My issue here, though, is I'm sure they'll build great agents, but Bedrock is a fantastic platform.
Yeah, but let me... Oh, sorry, Alan.
One second. Let me just put the cherry on. The problem is the world is moving away from single cloud platforms to multi-cloud. Everybody wants to put, a little piece here, a little piece there. They don't want to be locked into any one platform. Do the AWS agents work outside of AWS? Ira, go ahead.
Well, that was actually kind of the point I was going to bring up, because really, I hate the whole broad term AI, if you haven't known that before. Mm-hmm. And because AI is really just mathematical library programs, it's algorithms. And so what AWS is essentially doing is they're putting together and packaging and making it easier to implement the algorithms when you're using it within AWS. But just because you have these algorithms in place and something easier to make them possible, the problem is you need the data to put into it, because you have to train the AI. The AI has to be able to make good decisions. In order to make good decisions, it has to be able to have access to the appropriate data and so on. And having the program itself is one thing, but having all the data being able to pull into it is another thing. And to your point, Alan, if it's sitting there looking at, if all your data is on AWS in buckets that are accessible to the agent, maybe you have access to the data, but it still has to be in the right formats and stuff. And that's one of the problems. However, but if you're in a multi-cloud environment and all this stuff, it's like any other program. The program is only as good as the data that you put into it. But the problem is most people aren't sure what data to put into it first. And they're guessing. And this is why, for example, a chief data officer is critical in most large organizations now, because they have to be able to architect all the data in the organization to be able to feed these God, I hate the word AI programs. And this is where AWS, it's kind of nice to have, but at the same time, it's kind of like going to one of these little, maybe I'm dating myself, where they used to have these little art studios where you could go in and make your own ceramics.
They still have those places, the pottery places.
Oh, that's good to know. But you could go in there and get one of those, you could get one of those turny tables. But the problem is you still have to get the right clay. You still have to have the skills to make the clay in the right area, even though you have the turning tables. So AWS is giving everybody those little spinny tables, but they don't necessarily have the right clay. They don't know how to architect the programs to do it. It just makes it easier for people who know what they're doing to have a set of library programs to implement.
Yeah, I would agree with you in the sense that there's a handful of organizations like maybe a Reuters and Intuit that have the tech resources and have been early on this whole journey. But I'm betting that 95% of the companies out there are still trying to figure out, how do we make the actual AI agent, never mind actually give it data or anything else. They're just struggling with the little piece of code that they're going to use as the baseline.
So we live in an AI bubble. I'm sorry, John or Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I think are interesting here. Both of you guys are right, but the challenge is where are AI workloads going to get executed? And so who owns the agent, right, owns the workload, regardless of where the data is. And the challenge is it's inaccessible to a lot of folks, right? And here until now, there wasn't an SDK. There wasn't, sort of this reach into the browser. There wasn't some of the buildable tools. And then also the thing that everybody fights about is which service during what time of day gives you enough cores to return your AI workload at the speed you need it with the amount of tokens required to generate it. And so, doubling down on the amount of infrastructure they're willing to put behind it, I think is a statement. And I would argue, the rationale behind choosing between, using Gemini for this particular workload or, the Bedrock framework that allows you to get access to all of these other models, AWS says, hey, look, I have the highest percentage of the infrastructure in the cloud. I want everybody running their AI workloads here. But here until now, they haven't given us any tools aside from let me weaponize Bedrock specifically in order to make, the entire user flow easier for people that don't do this organically and aren't data scientists and platform wizards as well.
That's an interesting take, Fred. It's a discussion I had, not on the gang, on a TechStrong TV interview I did yesterday or the other day. And that is, we are at a funny juncture in this AI journey right now. I think you're 100% correct. Initially, the people they were building this for, the people who were using it, the people who were pushing the envelope were very much, let's call them AI engineers, data scientists, these kinds of people, that they were the initial audience, if you will. But now I think it's transitioning to, we want platform engineers, we want developers, we want security people, we want DevOps engineers, we want SREs, we want that sort of traditional IT stack from the developer on down. to start using AI. And that means, well, we've got to change the interfaces, the use cases, the nomenclature to make it fit their world, not the world of the data scientist or the AI geek. And it's going to take time, right? There's a transition that's going on right before our eyes. But you're right. He who controls, the platform that these agents are being built on and going forth is in the cat's bird seat. And the way I see it is everybody and their mother recognizes that in the tech world, and they're all vying for it. And part of the problem with AI, we discussed it on yesterday's show, is, it's the ultimate billionaires club.
Yeah.
You got to have serious cash to be able to play in this. So, saying.
I think DevOps engineers should just rebrand themselves as AI DevOps engineers, get themselves a 30% raise, and who's to say they're not an expert because nobody else knows what they're doing either. So
maybe.
Yeah.
There was that interesting, I think part of the announcement with this new edition of Marketplace, kind of as a central hub for businesses to deploy and manage specialized AI agents. And again, you talk about the Billionaires Club. So there's AWS, and I think Microsoft has Agent Store, Google Cloud's AI Agent Marketplace. I mean, there's kind of parceling.
Well, there's Agent Force, right? They want it. Cisco's doing it. ServiceNow is doing it.
Again, but these are the biggest of the biggest companies.
Right. It's the billionaires clubs.
Well, yeah, I still think I'll use the example, and what people need to understand. To me, I like analogies. It's like a spreadsheet. Right now, the problem is that if you go to a spreadsheet, like most people do a spreadsheet to create a very, very simple table, because, and it's like you're paying a lot of money for something that could be done in a Word document, frankly, at the end of the day for most people. But if you happen to really, really know how to work a spreadsheet, you could work magic. You could run your company off of Microsoft Excel. Not that I'm saying you should, but you could, because the capability is there. The problem is what AWS is doing sounds incredible at the moment for a variety of reasons. Much like Fred said, it's enabling a lot of what companies can do. The problem, though, is most companies don't have, to Fred's and everybody else's discussion, they don't have the expertise to take all these library of agents. They don't have the data. They don't have all this other thing to actually make it useful. They're, to Alan's point, it's like a billionaires club where a few large companies will have the people. It will simplify their way of ramping up. But it's people who are few and far between who have the ability to staff it up. And like what we're talking about in a later segment today, you have to throw lots of smart people to make it useful at it with lots of money.
Absolutely. So we're going to wrap this one up and take a break. But, we're creating AI have and have nots. Oh. And maybe that's what we're destined to,
I was going to say before you end this segment, we can maybe talk about it later in another segment, but Oxford University has been doing a lot of research into the haves and the have-nots, and it's a very small pool of the haves, and the vast majority of the rest of the world are the have-nots.
Oh, no doubt about it. But those haves will accelerate, right? Become super intelligent, maybe. That's what we're going to talk about next. Nice segue, John. You're watching Techstrong, gang.